Oh, this is so exciting.
This is really exciting. This is really historic. And I'll tell you what's funny about it is I was in a little bit of a crunchy mood yesterday because the New York Times had a big section on the top 50 shows on PBS as they celebrate their 50th anniversary, and Soul was not included. So I spent several hours sulking, ruminating, marinating, crunching. And then I decided, silver lining. What we're going to do is we're going to say congratulations to the whole team that wrote that article and suggest that something is missing and that they can make it up to us by doing a nice feature in the New York Times Sunday Magazine section, please, in February 2021, which will be Black History Month, in time for our PBS broadcast nationwide.
Wow.
So that's how I'm gonna spin it, more positively. And it may have just been overlooked. There may have been politics around what shows they could blow up, or the celebrities that they could attach to all those ruminations, because it was very celebrity driven. What were your feelings about Mr. Rogers? What were your feelings about Zoom and, all the great shows that were on there?
What were your feelings about The Last Poets? I mean, come on.
Well, what I will say, which is something I did not want to put in print, but I can share with everyone here, is that it is lacking diversity, which is rather tone deaf in this politically shifting social and racial justice climate that we are in. Yeah. And so as there is a renewed interest, and rightfully so, about African American history and cultural contributions, that's why this moment is perfect moment for Mr. Soul. So they need to, I think everybody at PBS needs to acknowledge that. It's already happening on our end. We will be the premiere film during Black History Month nationwide, and everybody is building up content around that, which is really great. But for it not to be included in this sort of global retrospective of the 50 years of Soul, holistic retrospective, I should say, not global, that's disappointing. So we'll have to take another tack, as we do with our filmmaking jujitsu moves.
Is it for political reasons why you wouldn't say that publicly?
Yes, because I don't want to appear disgruntled, especially as we launch into our, we just want as much positive energy around the project, eye-opening energy. What I pointed out in a very specific message to the culture editor already is that it's already been written up in the New York Times twice. I'm not sure how you missed that, like in your own backyard kind of thing. It's not like I'm seeking validation about my film. It's that the series, which is so important for PBS, has already been declared, a cultural touchstone, a landmark. And so it's not just me clout chasing, as we say out here in these streets, it's actually what is the significance of Soul in amidst the canon of public television shows, and also more broadly, Black television shows, or, of which there are few from that era. And we need to be reminded of all of that now more than ever. So to answer your question, yes, Hans, as we enter award season, and who knew that this announcement was coming today? So I'm glad I didn't write anything extra crunchy on the New York Times website.
You're good. I would have done that.
That would have been a bad look. I did write a little message in the comments like, "Hey, you guys seem to be missing something," and I quoted Jeff Farber, who's the New York Times music critic, and said, "It's already been written about in your paper. I think you may have left it off the list," kind of thing.
You're better than me. I'm never good at controlling my emotions in those instances.
It's hard. It took many hours. I will not lie. But
well,
I'm thinking long game, And wouldn't it be great to have them on our side? Because our premiere is, mark your calendars, February 22nd next year. And that is a Monday. And so to have a New York Times article on the Sunday prior would be phenomenal about the film, about the show, about the man. And then that would bring more eyeballs to the PBS broadcast the following day and give you national exposure, international exposure too. And also, if we do make the short list, that voting happens between the 5th and the 9th of February. So let's just hope that we do make it, fingers crossed. From that point, from February 9th through February 22nd, people will be watching the film. So you want to have as much good mojo happening during that time. But I digress. Hello, everybody.
Hello. But this is also why you have friends, right? Or people that you know, right? So that they can also offer commentary.
Absolutely.
To get people's attention. You don't have to do all of that work, right?
We are a very small and mighty team, and but everybody behind us understands what we're trying to do, what the message is, and that it's all extremely sincere and very transparent. So all of our intentions are good, and it's really exciting to have a film that you feel that way about.
Thank you so much. We should probably get started with all of that as an introduction.
Sure.
So I'm Cynthia Fuchs. I'm the director of the Visiting Filmmaker Series at Mason, and it's been going on for some 20 years with people actually coming to campus. Last semester and this semester, we have been doing it virtually, and we are thrilled to have Melissa Haizlip come to speak with us about her documentary, Mr. Soul, and she will talk more about that. Oh, my mic is breaking apart. Okay, sorry. I'm gonna, maybe I'll give over the introduction to Hans, since his mic seems to be working, and I'll work on mine.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming through. Very excited that you guys are here. And yeah, we have Melissa Haizlip, who is the extraordinary writer and director of the documentary Mr. Soul, which is about a PBS television show that ran on PBS from, if I'm not mistaken, 1978 to 1968 to 68 to 73. Yeah, so 5 years. And it ran all across the country, and it was created by Ellis Haizlip, a cultural icon in New York City, in the New York City art scene, originally from Washington, D.C., and created this wonderful, part of this wonderful arts community in New York. And he sort of took all these people and places and things that he knew, and he synthesized it into a television show that was called Soul. And it was one of the most unique television shows ever on PBS and on television in general at that time period. And the beautiful thing about this show was that it was broadcast live into such a diverse array of living rooms across the country. And so you meet all kinds of people who have seen the show and have fond memories about it. And Melissa is his niece, and she passionately wanted to document the journey of the making of this television show, and of the person who created it, and the people who influenced him, and the people who were around him, and the place, what New York City was like, who influenced Ellis when he was younger. And so the director, Melissa, dives into this show through this documentary, and we, the audience, are brought onto this amazing, amazing journey. And, you know, every time I've been a part of audiences that have seen this film, people just, it's like their lives are transformed when they see this film. And there's so much joy in seeing the film that people are just so happy. And that's amazing. I think it's just an interesting testament that a film that is a show that is that old, and when you tell people about the show and they get to see it, there's just so much joy that comes out of that. There's rarely any sadness. And so, yeah, the full disclosure, I was the cinematographer of Mr. Soul. And the irony is that I did not know that I was a cinematographer of Mr. Soul until Mr. Soul premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival, because I always thought that I was just, I thought for some reason that I was just filling in for somebody. So the entire time I shot Mr. Soul, I thought it was just filling in, that I just kept on getting called back to fill in. I was just filling in this day. Just the whole time, I didn't realize that I had shot the film until it premiered and my name was the only name on there. I was like, well, what about the other guys that shot? And remember, Melissa was like, no, you were the cinematographer. I didn't, maybe Melissa was so kind in the way she asked me. She didn't, I don't know. I don't know what happened. I don't know where the miscommunication was, but I hope maybe Melissa, maybe that explains some of my behavior on set. Maybe there's a detachment that I had that that sort of explains it. But I'm going to say that I'd like to introduce our featured guest, Melissa Haizlip, the director of Mr. Soul, and now the nominated Critics' Choice Award, nominated in 5 categories, the director of the nominated Mr. Soul. Please welcome Melissa to our forum.
Oh, thank you so much. It's so exciting to be here. I wish I could see your faces and be with you all in person. I love colleges and students, and being a student, I think I'm continually a student of life and learning, and especially filmmaking is a learning process all the time. But it's so great to be here, and thank you especially to our hosts at Mason University and to Hans for inviting me. This is such a remarkable moment that we're in. Not only is it confusing and uncertain, but it's also rife with opportunity. And so as we pay our respects to how difficult this moment is and to the lives that are lost, especially in the difficulty, which I always must acknowledge because I know everyone is having a difficult time. I'm also very grateful to be able to connect with you virtually and to have brought this film right now to a virtual release, which is a model that is completely new for us. And the decision to release it, I might be jumping ahead, but just to bring everyone up to speed very quickly, is that this film actually came out in 2018, as Hans was describing, at the Tribeca Film Festival. We had a robust film festival run for a year. We won over 17 awards, jury awards and audience awards, and we screened in over 50 festivals. But we always felt that we needed it to be released to a larger public. We wanted it to have educational distribution, especially, so it could be taught in schools like it's being taught today, and also to have an international release as well. But the timing never seemed quite right. We didn't get the type of bites that we needed. And then suddenly we're in this COVID world. And of course, with the unfortunate incidents with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, suddenly we're thrust into this moment of social protest, social justice and racial justice, protests, etc. And so we decided to bring it out now, even though we didn't have a model to go by, because we felt that the film was really important. And I just wanted to start by saying that because we wanted the film is very uplifting, and those of you who've had an opportunity to see it, you can see that it is far reaching, but it also has a lot of universal themes. And that you can take something that is about Black culture and also Black love, Black strength, Black sister and brotherhood, Black artistry, and this idea of art and film and culture really pushing the culture forward. That's why we brought it out now. And so we released it in the digital space, which is now the virtual cinema, at a time when nobody was really doing that. But that was in response to the fact that everything was closing. 2020 was canceled. All the festivals were canceled, and all of our brick and mortar cinemas were closing. And so we thought, how can we support independent cinema and also get this sort of love letter to Black culture out for our people, to uplift them and encourage them and to remind them of their greatness. So that was the impetus behind bringing the film out in the digital space now. We released it in August. We started with 3 theaters, cinema partners, people that we would want to screen the film, whether they be independent cinemas, art house cinemas, your favorite theater down the street, cultural institutions, film institutions, and museums. And we grew from the interest of 3 brick and mortar cinemas that turned into virtual partners. And that quickly became 60. And then by the time we premiered on August 28th, we had 90 cinema partners across the country. And suddenly we are able to put this film into people's homes and bring it to schools. And because we have this virtual platform that we had never anticipated. So this is all what you're looking at is, you know, a 10-year project, actually 11 years now, but coming to fruition at a moment when it could be most useful and hopefully bring joy and encouragement. And at the same time, we're, you know, doing our Tetris, trying to figure out what moves we have to do to bring this film to a distribution in a model that hasn't really been proven or precedented. So it's a very interesting time to be a filmmaker and remain not just sane and safe and healthy, but also inspired. So it's been quite a journey, but I'm happy to share more about the film.
I want to, you know, we do this a lot and the students get an opportunity to ask all kinds of questions, but I think specifically because today you're celebrating your nomination. You were on a list on Variety, had a list of about 30 films that would be considered that were favorites for the possibility of Oscar nominations. So you were on that list before you got this Critic Choice Award nomination. So the students now can see the end product, right? They can see the end results. You, like you so eloquently stated, you know, you got this distribution model that you've helped forge. But I want to go back to the beginning. I want to go back to this 11-year journey because I feel like I remember the first time I encountered you, you were already 5 years in. And I remember thinking, and this is something that happens with documentaries. What happens with documentaries is you spend so much time just trying to get the documentary started that sometimes by the time you get the documentary started, the subject matter in some cases is not of interest to people anymore. So you held this fortitude. So take me back to the beginning when you embarked on this journey and almost nobody wanted to go on this journey with you.
Mute, yes. Thank you. That's such a beautiful introduction. And it really was a long journey, and it really was 11 years. In fact, we'll be coming up on the 11-year anniversary in November. We shot our first interview in November 2009. I know some of you weren't even born yet, but the idea was, I always knew that we had this important story to tell. The difficulty, as many of you might have encountered, is what do you do with a great idea? In a day and age when we're completely digital, where everything moves so fast, people's attention spans are so short, and this idea of ascribing value is in contention, often, mostly with Black projects and Black culture. Of course, that's shifting a little bit now with the renewed interest in African-American culture and history, in this sort of inflection moment that we're in this sort of on the eve of a great racial reckoning that is to our advantage all of a sudden. But in 2009, as they say, nobody was checking for Mr. Soul. The idea was, I always knew that Soul itself, which was, for those of you who don't know, the greatest show you've never heard of. That's the best way to put it. It had become somewhat of a mythical Black unicorn in that many people had heard of it vaguely. They knew there was a show that was kind of like the Black Tonight Show, but because it wasn't visible, that sort of Pixar didn't happen. You know, it's not out there. Why haven't we heard about it? Therefore, it doesn't matter. And so to try to take something historical, which is a story about a television show from 1968 to 1973 during the most tumultuous period of our time, and to convince people that this was an important story that spoke universal themes, that was the hardest part. And so we began with this idea of making a film that had the similar provenance of the series, which was a nonprofit, grant-funded, public television show. So we thought, well, we have to be funded by grants. Maybe we can create a family, an understanding, an academic spine around the importance of this show, and with the long game of what funders will lead us to a public television broadcast. So in developing the show, we thought we have to sort of ascribe value to a piece that many people don't know anything about. That was the hardest thing. What we know we have is a gold mine of archival footage. Because Soul had been in the vaults for over 45 years at that point, we knew if we could just get people to see that there was a moment in time where diversity and inclusion were not buzzwords, and yet the importance and the significance of an expansive idea of Black culture on television and bringing Black culture to people's living rooms for the first time, that was significant, sort of the beginning of something. So I started crafting this story and building out of tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of research, and building an idea around this story and trying to connect with important people for the team, important people to support the film, and funding that would give the film the type of pedigree that it deserved. So all of that started and happened over a period of 5 years, research and development, shooting a little bit, receiving a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, shooting a little bit more, but these were research and production grants, R&D grants. I'm sorry, not production development, R&D grants. And those are hard to get too, because the funding space is very limited, and filmmakers are all vying for that same funding opportunity. But little by little, we built up our team. We created a board of academic advisors. Those would be professors in portfolio, out of portfolio, people like Henry Louis Gates, whom you all know, of course, from Finding Your Roots and the different shows that he's done on PBS, but also people from the Black arts movement like Sonia Sanchez, professors in humanities like Gail Wald, who is the chair of the English department at George Washington University, and also won a fellowship, a Guggenheim, so that she could take time off to write a book about soul. And then also Professor Bracy and Louis Messiah, and just putting together this really important team that could anchor the story in academic excellence, rather, with the notion of literally building it on a foundation based on what Henry Hampton had done for Eyes on the Prize. So that goes way back, but Eyes on the Prize, as many of you know, is a really important historical documentary series. Now, of course, that's a series. We're only trying to make an hour-and-a-half film, but because the film was not based on a Pulitzer Prize winning historical novel, and there was nothing that it was based on except my ideas, we had to figure out a way to give it the type of pedigree that it deserved so that we could attract the right people and so that people would say yes. It was always, what do we have to do to get to yes? And as an independent producer and director and filmmaker, that was challenging. So I joined every type of group I could join, every fellowship that was presented to me. Film Independent in Los Angeles has one called Project Involve for emerging filmmakers. Firelight Media has one for emerging filmmakers of color. The Firelight Media Doc Lab under Stanley Nelson. The Producers Guild has one for the diversity project that they do. And I just kept building and building all these fellowships and building a team of filmmakers and alliances at the same time. And so slowly but surely, we were able to give a little, take a little, make more and more of a 20-minute work in progress. And then we would keep trying to get more grants. But I'm telling you, we wrote so many grants. One grant, I think they rejected us 17 times. Yeah. So this was constant, a constant grant writing process that progressed over time. Some got to yes and some never got to yes, but we were really determined to have that type of honest, transparent, publicly funded, vetted project, so that by the time we got to being able to have a PBS broadcast, it would have been in the right track all along.
It's a pretty remarkable journey for the reasons that I mentioned. um, because you were able to be so resilient through the process. So clue us in a little bit about what led to that resiliency. What led to your fortitude for those first 5 years?
I think in terms of the resiliency, it was the knowledge. You know, as filmmakers, you can sometimes you have to step back and see the macro before you go in for the micro. And I always had this idea of the long game. And I knew that year after year, in fact, part of the slowness of the genesis of the film was that I was actually waiting for someone else to make it. I kept pitching it to other more established film groups or film makers, thinking, you know, well, Ken Burns has got to do this. Somebody, you know, somebody should be doing this. And realizing finally that it had to be me, and it had to be a team that understood and was connected to Ellis Haizlip on another level. And the resilience came from knowing that no story had been told like this before, certainly not about the Black arts movement, the Black power movement, the intersection of politics, gender, arts, culture, and activism around freedom of expression and liberation. Because Soul itself as a television show was not only a vehicle for African-American artistry, but it was a platform for political expression and the fight for social justice. Nothing like that existed to date, and still at this moment. So I knew that there was a place for this story. And I was determined also because Ellis Haizlip was my uncle. I saw that I needed to uphold his legacy. So there was that personal determination as well. Even though it was not about me and I'm not in the film, I'm just shepherding it. I knew that this was a story that needed to go down in history, and that it needed to be resilient as well and had to be contemporary, that it wasn't going to be just a look back, sort of nostalgic piece. But what about the revolution of 50 years ago? And what about Ellis's voice do we need to hear now? So that's what kept me going, was realizing that it just had to be done. And even though I had to take breaks because we ran out of funding or we got so many rejections, I just never lost sight of the long game and the importance that the story was much bigger than but bigger than I was or am. Always. That was always in the back of mind. I just had to remember that there were a lot of stakeholders in this story, from the artists who first appeared on Soul to the story of a movement, the story of a people, the story of the culture and the music, and that that wasn't something to let go of.
I'm going to ask you a more technical question about the process. When you sat down to structure this story, what was the big picture structure of the story? What did you see? So I want to ask this question because for so many young filmmakers, the idea of structuring a doc, and if you ever get a chance to pitch a doc, that's sometimes the fear that the funders have about giving money to a filmmaker, is that they will shoot everything and then not know what to do with it. So what was the big picture structure of the film to you? If you can give us a 3-minute pitch of how the film was structured, what would it be?
Okay, don't start timing me, but I will give you the pitch. The idea for this was a hybrid, and that's what caught people off guard, because everyone kept asking, is it a film about the show or a film about the man? You have to make a choice. Everyone understood the idea of a biography or a biographical film, and everyone understood sort of a retrospective of a show. But I said, I want to do something different. I want it to be a hybrid. I want it to be the biography of the show and the biography of the man, because they were integral. They were, you know, inseparable in a way. And so when I pitched it, I said, what you have here is not only a love letter to Black culture, but it is an examination of how Black culture, Black lives, and Black art and activism can come together, and how that sort of intersection can impact culture and change. And so I had to explain that It's not your typical doc in that it's not a biography that's cradle to grave but instead we're going to drop in on 5 years of a pivotal moment in broadcast history and Black history and American history, and that all those things are woven into one. And in our particular case, the challenge was, how do you take those 3 storylines and make them into one? So what we did was we literally created 3 storylines, which I can go into if you grant me a few more minutes.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so for filmmakers out there, I know you appreciate this because it can be daunting when you have a massive amount of footage and historical references, and you want to make something contemporary at the same time. So the way we approached it was we had 3 different storylines. We had storyline A, which is a story of soul, which was pretty easy. From 1968 to 1973, we know we have 130 episodes, 1 hour each. So the goal was to put together a timeline or a sequence of the most important episodes and the most important conversations, visually stunning, et cetera, that show you a timeline. And that was one timeline going all the way around the room in 4x6 color coordinated cards. Then we have storyline B, which is a story of Ellis Haizlip, the man, the myth, the pioneer. Who is he, and can we drop in 5 years of his biography to understand how his personality and his life story impacted the show inexorably, how they were linked. Then we have storyline C, which is the zeitgeist. What was happening in America that would have provided an opportunity for something like Soul to exist? So we cut an entire film, you guys, of just archival footage, literally an hour and a half of archival footage. So now we have 3 colored timelines going all the way around the room. The challenge was to collapse those 3 storylines into one. And how do you find the salient moments of each one so that they match up? So everything had to match up. The story of Ellis had to match up with the story of Soul and the story of what was happening in America. And then we had to figure out how to weave these 3 storylines together in a way that was cohesive and entertaining and not jarring, because you're jumping between 3 storylines. So we had to create a unifying visual aesthetic, and in our case, a unifying graphic aesthetic that would help us pull those 3 together. Because when you think of all the disparate assets that you have archival footage of Soul, you have archival footage of the world, the nation, Black culture, you have images, and you also have this new, 5K, 6K, well, I think we shot in 4, but some was 5K footage. So how are you going to combine all of that? And with the main goal of being economic with your storytelling as an editor. And so the biggest hurdle was understanding that all of this information had to line up and it had to earn its way in. And that was the mandate behind every choice we made in editing and pulling the story together. Has it earned its way into the film? We may love it, but we can't use that particular clip, or maybe we can't have 3 Al Green songs, Trying to make these decisions was very hard, but with the first rule of thumb being, has it earned its way in, and does it tie all those 3 elements together? And that's why, if you've seen the film, you'll notice it's very layered at times. And you might be seeing 5 things at once, or hearing the bed of like the Soul soundtrack, but you're seeing in what we call like the Angela Nixon sequence, Nixon arguing about the voice of America, and Angela Davis saying, "Are you crazy? This is what's really happening in America," and all the clashes that are happening. But you're seeing 5 things at once. But we made the decision that yes, contemporary audiences are, and Black audiences especially, are dealing on a daily level this way. We're getting tons of stuff at the same time. We're assimilating so much information. What we see, what we hear, what we're texting, what we're posting, what we're scrolling. We are very sophisticated now in the way we bring in information. So that was a choice we made, which was very bold and very daring to have multi-layers at the same time, telling the same story, but demanding audiences to hear one thing, see another. And, you know, very much the way we operate in life, the way Black people are always code switching, or, you know, operating on several different levels, or the fact that we are not a monolith, everyone has different experiences. And so we brought all of that sensibility to the film.
Let me ask a slight process question. Besides the initial interviews, what were some of the tools that you used to help you with the storytelling process?
Yes, so beside the initial interviews, which of course were instrumental in helping us put the film together, the first tool would have been the script, the outlines for the script that we made, and those kept changing. I must have written, I don't know, 50, 80 scripts for this film over the last 8 to 10 years, because the film was always evolving around who we could get, what were the stories that we were anticipating they would tell, and then what were the happy accidents that you discovered once you're in the interview, and how flexible can you be with that, in realizing that you don't know something that might take you down another tack or another rabbit hole. So the script and the outlines were really, really important tools to start with, because you do have so much information at your hands. And then the other tool that was really key would be our advisors, because we wanted to make sure that we were being accurate and understand on a greater scale the stories that we were telling, because when you bring in the women's movement, the anti-Vietnam movement from a Black perspective, the Black arts movement, Malcolm X's movement, you are dealing with some really important historical narratives here, and different opinions about them. And all of that was really important to encompass and to weigh in, not just for historical accuracy, but for significance. And so we were constantly writing the script, honing the outlines, rewriting the script, taking the interviews and what we got, but also doing so much research constantly and finding new material to research. So it was a multi-layered sort of toolkit that we had at our disposal. And then of course you never knew who was going to be available to you and how that could impact your film. For example, we were set to interview Earth, Wind & Fire, and we had the shoot lined up, and they had finally agreed to an interview, and at the last minute they canceled. But we had an entire shoot, set, team, equipment, everything was ready. And so we had to pivot quickly and realize that we couldn't get them in person, and make sure that we had the right interview to support what we wanted to say about Earth, Wind & Fire, and bring in another musical guest, which happened to be Black Ivory. And so then we had to really pivot to see what part of the story could this Black Ivory sequence lead us to, which turned out to be like the Battle of the Band sequence. So it's not really a tool, but it's the idea of flexibility to understand how your themes can shift depending on the availability of guests and what it is you're trying to say. And then of course, having really important people connected to the film has also impacted it. After the film was released at Tribeca, we won an award from Ken Burns, and that completely changed the game for us. And it's not really a tool, but it was a mechanism to go back, to have him on our team, to go back and approach PBS to deal with some rights issues that we had. And that completely opened the gate and released the film back to us. So it's this constant, almost just remaining flexible that helps really with the trajectory of the film. In terms of the building blocks of it though, in terms of like actual building tools, we had 3 different editors. And this was really important to recognize the strength of each editor. One editor was really good at montages and layering many different assets, sometimes having 5 or 6 lines in our, Avid timeline, in our Avid. Another editor was really great at building character and would come in and make these character pods and make sure that we were staying on point with our characters throughout the film. And then another editor was literally a late editor. So we would have an editor from 10 to 6, another editor from 6 p.m. to 10, and then another third editor would come in and work with us from like 10 till the wee hours of the morning. And literally having a team that brought different strengths turned out to be a tool, because we could be working on different, oh, pardon me, hit the computer. We could be working on different aspects of the film and different layers of the film that would all come together. And one of our most important tools, though, was, it's not really a tool, but being able to work with someone like Blair Underwood, to bring him in when we recognized that thematically throughout the film, we had to bring Ellis Haizlip, the main character, forward. And the decision to create these little vignettes that were like the interior Ellis, that was really key. And to bring on an executive producer and a vocal narration style artist such as Blair Underwood to really bring out the interiority of Ellis Haizlip. And so that became a whole nother way of structuring the film, looking at the entire film that we had and saying, okay, how can we literally drop in these vignettes where Ellis is saying something important, and that also becomes a tool to help seam together all these, the 3 storylines that we had.
Can I ask a continuously technical question? I think when you mentioned the scripts, and I get this question a lot from students and sometimes first-time documentary filmmakers, how does the script, the idea of a script, play in a documentary? Because I think people assume it's a documentary, you're just shooting stuff and then you cut footage together. So how was the, we know how a script works in a narrative sensibility. How does script work in a documentary sensibility?
There are several ways, several different types of scripts that we use. We had a narrative script, which was used often to help raise money, where we had to literally attach a script up to 45 pages to our really big fundraising opportunities, like the National Endowment for the Humanities, National Endowment for the Arts, the really big funding, the Ford Foundation Just Films or funding opportunity. They will ask for a script to see what your vision is for the film. And of course you're thinking, how can I write a script when we haven't even shot it yet? But you have to imagine what that film will look like and be able to translate your vision and your aesthetics to the page. That's different from a shooting script. A shooting script might be, you have ideas of who you have parts of a transcript that comes from other interviews that you've already done, lined up with in sort of a prologue, first act, second act, crisis, denouement, ending, and like an epilogue format. And so you have envisioned who's going to say what. And now you may be interviewing 5 people who tell the same story, but it's up to you as a writer ahead of time to sort of anticipate who's going to tell this part of the story best. So you might write out a shooting script that describes who would say what at what time, so that as you're interviewing that person, you're keeping in mind, okay, wait, I already have someone else talking about this, and let's think about how to position this person in the narrative so that they will say the right thing. You're not necessarily trying to put words in their mouth, but you are considering the story that you're telling and who will say it best. One example of that I think is so phenomenal is like the Stanley Nelson doc from a couple of years back on what was it called again? Freedom Riders. He does an extraordinary thing where he knows he has the entire, the Freedom Riders who were going down to help register folks to vote, and they were attacked. It was just, the 3 guys were murdered: Schwerner, Cheney, and help me, last one.
Can't remember.
The last gentleman.
Yeah.
The 3 gentlemen who were killed. So what he did with that story was he told the same story, but he managed to have them tell it in first person as if it was happening. And that was an extraordinary narrative, and it's a real device that you use. I was so impressed by that, because how do you put people back in that time? Now, I knew we couldn't necessarily do that with Soul and
Goodman,
Mr.
the
Soul.
last person, Goodman.
Goodman, thank you. So sorry. I should have known that. I just kind of spaced out. Sorry. No disrespect. So that's an example. If anybody ever wants to go back and see it, it's an extraordinary technique, because here is something that happened, you know, so long ago, and yet you feel like it's in real time, and it connects you to an historical event in a way that really is mind-blowing. And it you have this real visceral experience while you're watching it. I remember thinking, I love that technique, but when you're interviewing someone in person, you can't sort of ask them to speak a certain way, because you might lose, they might become self-conscious rather, or you might lose the great dynamic you have. Anything could go wrong. And if you blow the interview, you've blown the interview. So when you have a shooting script, you in your mind can go, okay, I know that I need him to say this because it's coming up and I imagine it being here. And so you position the questioning differently while you're doing that interview. A third script that we have is, once you've shot and you've pulled your selects, technically, if there's several directors or several producers or an archival producer, you're keeping in mind what you have to bolster everything people said. And you write out a script based on the transcripts that have been sent to you. And you literally put it in like a Google Docs, a live document. So you're seeing all the bites. And hopefully what you've done is you have, if you're editing an Avid, as we did, you use a program called ScriptSync, which is really great for editing, because it literally, I don't know, and everyone's on Premiere now probably. It's one of the problems with Premiere, they don't really have this. But this great way that you can access certain moments in the transcript as you're editing and go immediately to that scene. And that's very, very helpful. So that comes in handy. So, you know, so you have your development, your R&D script, where you're coming up with the idea for the film, which is more like an outline, just recapping. Then you have your actual script, which might be a fundraising script to give an overview of what your film would say. You've done your research, you know exactly who's telling what part. Then you have the shooting script with the idea of, let me hope that I'm going to get all these people to say these things in this order. And then finally, your editing script based on what you've pulled from your transcripts, and if that actually matches up, or if you're telling a whole new story. The reason that's good is because once you see that, and you've built out most of what your film will be, then you know where the holes are. And you know that you don't have certain parts of the story that you need to still tell your story. And you can clearly say, okay, I still need to go back to Kathleen Cleaver and get her to talk about this moment, because otherwise I'm not going to have anything to sustain all this wonderful footage and historical footage that I want to put in. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it can be intimidating, because everyone thinks, well, there's so many other ways to make a film. And especially if you're not doing historical doc and you're doing, you know, a follow doc, for example, or something that's more verite. Even though you might do a verite or a follow doc, I will say it over and over and over again. It's all about story. It's always about story. Even if it's a documentary or a narrative or a feature, what is the story you're telling? And if you can't really write that out, even if it's not a script, then you're going to have some problems when you get into even just conveying what your story is to your team. As long as everybody understands where you are, it can be any version of a script that you want. But it is liberating if you can somehow convey in writing what it is you see for the vision of the film, even if it's going to change, and it most certainly will evolve.
Can you describe a moment where you get past the initial phase of getting people to buy into the script, and you're now possibly shooting? Can you describe a moment where you're sort of lost in it? So you've started it, but you're nowhere near the end. And so talk about that a little bit, and what made you feel lost and what helped you kind of get through.
That's a good question, because nobody talks about the dark days. And there are dark days. It can be overwhelming sometimes when you have this really great vision and you absolutely have no money, or you keep getting rejected. I can't tell you how many times we were rejected by Sundance. And all I thought was, I need them to put their stamp of approval on this, whether it's, researching, or maybe getting into one of their creative labs, or the directing lab, or the producing lab, or even if it's R&D funding or production funding. I could not get Sundance to say yes every single time. Oh, it's getting better, Melissa. Oh, it's great. Oh, it looks great. Oh, we love you. Come to Sundance, enjoy. But no. So I remember feeling completely crushed that how come I can't get this validation? Why? What is not competitive about Mr. Soul? And so you keep going back and you keep going back, and you say, you look at your materials, you look at what everybody else is doing, you look at the funding, but you also look at the festivals, and you see what people are screening, what people are talking about, what people are showing, what's getting bought. And then you get lost because you think, I don't have that validation. What is it going to take to ascribe value to what I'm doing? I believe in it. My team believes in it, but it's not landing for some reason. That can feel like the worst, because you realize, have I made a mistake? Am I mistaken in the importance? Why is this so important to me, but not important to others? And that's when the real deep soul searching happens. And you realize, wait a minute, it is important. Just Black culture is important. The story is important. What Ellis did was important, regardless of who I am. And it's almost like I had to get out of my own way, because I knew, yes, I'm a first-time filmmaker for a feature. I've done a lot of shorts and done a lot of art films, but a first feature doc. And I realized, well, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe because I'm not famous, or because I don't have a proven track record. How do I get around that? So I really was trying to build up our team and find the best collaborators and the most important mentors, and so that they could ascribe value to it, and then just keep plugging along and keep plugging along. And the hardest part, though, is when there's no money, and when you're rejected from a grant that you've been working on for a year and a half, and then you wait the 6 months for the grant review panel to get back to you, only to find out that you're rejected. You've basically wasted 2 years. And so you're thinking, now what? So it's a constant case of renewal and determination. And every now and then something happens that makes you realize, wait a minute, yes, there has to be a road to yes. And if you keep realizing that what you have to say is unique, that your story is unique, and that you're not necessarily in your own way, it's you have to keep reaffirming those three things and find people who believe in the project as much as you do. And sometimes that might just be a new team member, or a new opportunity to write another grant, or finding people stepping away from the project for a month or so, and immersing yourself in other people's projects. That's always been really stimulating. Supporting other people in the industry. That's something that's really important to me, to find kinship with other projects, and to find ways to elevate your peers, whether it's just on social, pushing a few pixels around, or really, jumping on everybody else's team and working with them, which is something I've done too. Getting that sort of reaffirmation that we are all part of a greater narrative, and that this is not a solo effort. Reminding yourself too that team building is really, really important, especially for filmmakers of color who don't always get the support that they need or deserve. And so building community, getting into the next fellowship, pushing for visibility, and just not being discouraged and not giving up.
That's a great point that you bring. And I think I want you to just to sort of dive into it just a little bit more. The idea of the team building. I always found it interesting when I was working with you how team oriented you were as a director. Um, Talk about that as a sort of philosophy or as a mental space. There are so many people in filmmaking who are solo acts. It's about me, it's about my vision. This is my crew. And you always seem to have just a different use of language and a sort of different energy on set. Where does that come from?
You know, that's really interesting that you say that, because I have a great love and affection and adoration for what other people do. Um, I've always really seen that we are so not alone in this journey that we're on. And art is always a collaboration. Of course, you can have your own spark and your own ideas, but you can't do anything without a team. And the idea of bringing a team together is so important. My motto has always been know your strengths and staff your weaknesses. And I say that all the time, especially when I'm trying to encourage young filmmakers, because making a film can be really, really daunting when you don't know something, for one thing. And the importance of recognizing that you don't know it and that you can bring people who do. That's one aspect of being a really good producer. But aside from that, this idea that there is strength in numbers and there is strength in um, a communal sense of purpose. And when you bring together people who are independently brilliant and have their own set of skills and own experiences and own vision, it only makes the vision that much broader. And so for example, I've always wanted to work with you, Hans, and had admired you from afar. And I remember literally doing my homework, watching all of your films and examining every scene and every frame and every device that I could see and saying, I love that. Oh, look what he did there. Now that's interesting. And so you're approaching people's work out of curiosity and adoration and appreciation, because you have to recognize that everybody who is doing this work is working so hard to be the best that they can be. And so why not bring that best that it can be energy together to make a team that collectively can be at its zenith? That really, really excites me, because in this particular instance, it would take a village of brilliant minds and extraordinary a depth of experience to put a project like this together. When Hans and I talked about what the film would look like and how to accomplish a visual aesthetic that would be commensurate with the gorgeousness of the Soul Archive, that was deliberate, because I knew I had seen that beauty in his work. I knew I had seen this ability to capture beauty and capture blackness in a way that was unique and measured and deliberate. And I loved his work for that. Your work, I'm sorry, I'm talking about you like you're not there. But trying, every choice is deliberate. And when you bring on a team and you bring on a gaffer, for example, our wonderful gaffer, Christian Epps, and I knew that Christian had worked with Hans, and I knew that they had a language. So this idea of bringing together people that have a language to create something, and then you have this knowledge of fraternity and trust, because what you want is everyone to bring their A game, so that what you're seeing is a combination of everybody's A game. It's not just my film, and it's not just my idea. It's how do you bring everybody's talents together? Because I think that's what really makes a film great. The different levels, visual, audio, um, the history, our archival producer, for example, was amazing, but so was our music supervisor, and then our composer. And you just keep building and building and making sure you're putting the project in the right hands. And those hands have to be loving, intelligent, not just talented, obviously, but knowledgeable and flexible. So you're not only bringing together personalities that will mesh well, but this notion that together we become a single organism that is supporting this film. And I think that's what you see when you see Mr. Soul, because it's a beautiful harmonic convergence of all of these things and all of these people and all of this talent and all of this energy. And I believe that that's what Ellis Haizlip did too with Soul. It was never about him and pushing his story. It was about creating an opportunity for others to shine and pushing forward this expansive vision of Black culture in a way. So team building is really, really important, not just to find people with whom you're compatible, but also a vision that doesn't always have to agree with yours, but is supportive, because we have to trust each other's dissent as well as agreement, as long as we have the same vision at hand.
I think something that's extraordinary and deeply underappreciated about you as a filmmaker is, we in this conversation, we discuss the genesis of the film, the time frame, and the painstaking process of getting people to believe in it, and then being in the middle of it. And we are, lucky enough to sort of experience the success. And then if we look at the film, we can clearly see the skill in the filmmaking, right? And you so eloquently sort of discussed all the pieces that you've put together to make that happen. But one of the things so besides sort of admiring those abilities and seeing it on set, I've said before, I always just admired your efficiency as a director. You didn't waste time or energy. If we sat in the chair and shot for 4 hours, I knew that every minute of those 4 hours are required. And there were times where you would just do 20 minutes with somebody, which meant that you just understood. You had such command of the material. But the other side that impressed me about you, and I want you to talk about, is you also, in this process and doing a publicly funded film, mastered the business of the film, mastered the business of the marketing. And for me, here's a remarkable moment. We're in Tribeca, and, I meet Blair for the first time, and Sam Pollard is there, and they're taking our picture, and there's a PR person rushing us in here. And then there's this big concert associated with the film and all this publicity surrounding the film. And then we go to Los Angeles and it's like the same thing. And everywhere where the film premiered, there was a sense of the business of marketing the film, that you weren't just a skilled filmmaker, but there was a machine around it. And yet there wasn't a studio. There was no Netflix. There was no HBO, no Showtime. And in your hands, it was like this master poker player. The hand that you were dealt, you figured out how to win rounds. And if you had to bluff somebody with a stronger hand, you bluff them into folding so you win the round. So filmmakers, students tend, and I was very deliberate in the questions I asked. I want to ask pointed questions about the mental process, the actual process, but students love the business process, but I didn't want to forget about your mastery in business of the film. So talk to me about how you built this amazing marketing team to get to where you are today, to where you're getting the nominations.
First of all, thank you. That is just extraordinary. And it is a highly unusual situation. in that, and I was saying, and right before everyone signed on, that I needed a clone, one person to do all the work and the other person to sleep, because one of us needs to sleep. But this idea of the work doesn't end once you've completed the film. And even when you think you've completed the film, you haven't necessarily completed the film. For example, there's another film that should be made called Chasing Al Green, because we spent, as you know, months after the film premiered at Tribeca trying to cajole, and almost had Al Green for an interview down in Memphis. And I know I'd even bought your ticket, Hans, to come to Memphis. And then he changed his mind. Somewhat of a mercurial character. But this overarching idea and understanding that once the film was finished, or at least ready to be shown, that it needed to have this sort of underpinning of marketing that would place it, unusually, this is unusual, to place it in the same category as other films that have been supported by their distributors. We knew that we didn't have a distributor like Netflix, Hulu, a streamer, etc., or even Focus Features. Let me give you an example. One of my dear friends, and of course I always shout them out, is Dawn Porter. Dawn Porter is an extraordinary filmmaker who has 2 films right now out. One is the film about John Lewis called Good Trouble, and the other was just aired last weekend, so wonderful, on MSNBC, called The Way I See It, which is the Pete Souza filmmaker who is part of the Obama administration, and his photographers. Photography, he was the staff photographer, sorry, I'm getting all. Anyway, so Dawn has a film called Good Trouble. Let me show you, just in contrast, what her setup is, because that was a film that was commissioned initially. So it comes out on CNN Films, so she already has that set up. It has Magnolia Pictures, which is like the releasing platform, which can drop it into theaters nationwide. And then it also has Participant, which is a really big and important social justice activation type of distributor. So that type of trifecta, or like the perfect pyramid, is the type of releasing strategy you need nowadays. If you're not going to be an original program for Netflix, or an acquired film for Netflix or Hulu, they have millions of dollars, and that your whole distribution could be all set. We are a purely independent, like there is no other example of a 100%, 1000% independent film, where we started with an idea, no money, no hidden financiers, no sugar daddies in the corner writing checks, and no broadcast plans in the future. Whereas some films are set up from the beginning, like Dawn's film knows that it's going to be on CNN, or the film that she just did about Pete Souza, MSNBC. So it aired on MSNBC last weekend with no commercials. And so it was already set from the beginning. When you're not like that, but you want to be considered in the same category, the importance is to find a way to situate the project with the same type of pedigree, the same type of exposure. And so I knew that it would be very important early on to connect us with a really great publicist. Somebody I had met so many years ago in LA named David Magdale. And we met, I had been following all of his work, and I loved all the projects he attached himself to, not just because he does really poignant and soulful type of films that are significant, and also runs Oscar campaigns, but I just liked the way he was moving. And we became friends way early on, like I'm gonna say 2010, 2011. And I always knew that's my guy. When I collaborated with him, he understood soul from the inside out. He had watched Soul as a kid. He loved the story of Ellis Haizlip. He too is a queer man, and was really excited to see an unsung hero of the Black community who is also queer have a story like this, to be a hero. And so he aligned himself with our film from the beginning. And that was really, really important, because here you have a master of publicity, and who has associations with and relationships with all the right outlets, but also all the right film festivals. So that was really important for us. Of course, we couldn't really afford him. There was that issue. But he came on for Tribeca and some of our key film festivals, like Tribeca. I think he helped us with IDA, which is the really important documentary award, which we won for our best music documentary. And also a couple of other key AFI docs, which we also won. So he was really helpful in providing the type of literature, the assets that you would need to put together. But he was taking my lead, and I was saying, this is how we have to situate the film. This is how we have to think about it. It's not just about, as I said before, clout chasing or trying to win awards. It's about putting the film out in the zeitgeist as a necessary, almost like cultural corrective, to say, hang on, guys, this is a film that represents for the people, by the people. There's so many people that need to know about this. And so let's attract the right people to be involved. And so that's also something I did on my own from the very beginning, finding the communities for which or for whom this film would matter, trying to create engagement, not for results, but for meaning. That was the key, not for results. And so if we were creating opportunities to screen the film, I always said, yeah, but let's do free screenings too. Let's create a screening for the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, which will be free and not geo-blocked. Could have up to like 1,000 people on that one. But that meant we were paying, or I was paying. Always trying to build community, build meaning, and to take the film and say, this is yours. We've made this for you, for the public, for Black culture, for history's sake. And that was a different approach, because we were never trying to get something, we were trying to give something. And in doing that, we were positioning the film in a way that would allow people to explore it, and also to discover it. Because remember, there's so many people who still have never heard of soul, and a whole new generation. So this idea that they could have something that is so great, so entertaining, so historical, and so informational, and still be something that could be discovered, that was the key. And now, as we've sort of dropped this into the virtual space, which we were never anticipating, and that's how I started our conversation, that was key as well, is how do we find a way to make this relevant for people such that they can discover it? And I'm going to give you an example. We just had the most wonderful article written, and I can drop it in the chat. I knew that a lot of people were reviewing the film. We have tons and tons of reviews, and they're wonderful, and wonderful opportunities to do Q&As and talkbacks with everyone. That's very important to me. But my idea was, how can we place this in the cultural space and have a conversation about the culture, not just what Mr. Soul did then. I'm sorry, not what Soul did then, but what is soul mean to us now? I literally was on my phone every night, trolling through Instagram, Twitter, looking for like young Black creatives and reading what they were writing, reading what they were talking about. And I found somebody that I really liked his vibe. I liked his page. I liked his gifs. Or do you say gifs? I always say gifs, but I liked his whole vibe. And I thought, I wonder if I could get him to write about the film. And so I literally hit him up in the DMs. We became friends. I said, man, I really like your vibe. I like how you're writing. Are you by any chance attached to any outlet? And he said, well, I sort of freelance here and there. And I said, well, I've just got this great story I think you would like. Will you take a look? And he said, sure. I said, it's about soul. And he said, oh, that's so funny. I was just watching episodes of Soul on YouTube. I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. So I just dropped it in his lap and I walked away, not with a result in mind, but like a relationship. And then for the next couple of weeks, he was like, oh my God, this film, this story, how did I miss this? This is incredible. We built this relationship up. on Twitter in the DMs for literally a month until he said, I want to write about this. And I said, that's great. Well, that would be great. What should you write? He said, I don't know. I'm going to pitch it to my editor at the New Yorker. And I was like, oh my God, here we go. And then within a few days, he said, Melissa, I pitched it. We want to talk about the state of, how did he put it exactly? Representation and authorship in the media, Black representation and authorship in the media. And I was like, oh my God, bingo, perfect. And so he pitched it. And I said, by the way, I have a ton of photos that are really spectacular that have never been seen since they were created 50 years ago. So we have this vast array of visuals that are stills from our film. And he came back to me and said, they loved it. Let's do it. Are you available? Can you talk now? And I said, yes, yes, I can. Because the answer is always yes, right? What resulted is this remarkable article. But you guys, I have to tell you, he's class of 2017. He just came out of college, but he saw it, he got it, and it's amazing. So if it's not in the DMs already or the chat, I will drop it in there. But I just want you to see this example of, and when you know the journey, the truth behind that story, that I was literally trying to find somebody that would understand the story we were telling and also put a new spin on it. And to put it in his hands was so liberating. And again, I didn't find out until the end of our call that he went to Yale and I went to Yale as well. And that we had all this other stuff in common was so exciting. And to find out that, he was class of 2017, I was like, mind blown. Who knows what this story is going to turn out to be? And it's amazing. And it's a huge article in the culture section of the New Yorker. It came out last week on Friday. So I'm going to share that with you now. But it's an example of how we wanted to slowly roll out this film, but in a really organic way, in a genuine way, and finding the right people. I also had our guild, we have a wonderful music supervisor named Ed Gerard, who brought on Robert Glasper to be our composer. And Ed is he's like part of the Guild of Music Supervisors. I said to Ed, let's do a big screening and invite all like music people, because nobody's really approached this from a music point of view. Let's bring in that community and let them own it. Let them feel good about it. And then I said, and also, if you happen to have any emails for any writers, music writers, let's get them involved too. So it was always this sort of giving, like, we have this something to give to you. What do you think? And how does it impact you? Let them fall in love with it on their own and find their own meaning. And that's what this is. It feels like it's a constant gift. And it's just so genuine. The intention behind it has always been genuine.
I wish I had gotten this masterclass on that part of it before I released my feature, because I think you just dropped so many amazing gems about how to think about your film and how to situate it. And, people have spoken generically about the need for community and how to get people from a community standpoint to buy into the product. But I definitely appreciate it. And they did drop the article in the chat, just so you know. So I appreciate you saying that. But in hearing you sort of talk, it makes me then sort of look and pivot a little bit to the future and to think about, because I'm going to say this, it just feels like you need like a 3-picture deal with somebody. Like you need to be unleashed. Somebody needs to say, okay, like we're going to greenlight whatever Melissa wants to do, and just have her pitch some stories. So hopefully, what does the future look like?
I was trying to jump in before I was unmuted. Sorry about that. Well, the good news is I am getting a lot of calls right now, which is really exciting. I didn't anticipate that at all, as we're so busy just trying to get this film out. But I will say, caveat is that part of that is because people are realizing insert curse word there, we need to get on the right side of history and make sure that we are diverse in our staffing. It's similar to the story of Soul, where Kit Lucas said, we don't have a Black person on our staff doing anything. I'm actually being approached now from companies I've always wanted to work with. But for them, it might be like, oh, we got it. Like, for example, I won't name a name, but you probably do know, for anybody who's on social in the last 2 months, the big controversy around the Tiger Woods doc that came out. And just a friend of mine who is a brown filmmaker, wonderful director and editor, wrote back. Her name is Geeta. I can say her name, Geeta Gandabir. She wrote to a guy who is a wonderful white filmmaker, but very privileged and has won like everything. You know, who he had written a little blurb on, just a post on Facebook saying, "I'm so proud to bring this story to fruition, and it's an incredible story about Tiger Woods," and then listed everybody on the team. And there's like not one Black person on the team except one. There is one, and it is Sun Pollard, by the way, as like a consultant that was brought on rather late. And so what this did was it sparked this conversation about representation and authorship, in which my friend so rightly said, how can you, literally 1 month after George Floyd, be bragging about this extraordinary show you've made about someone, a person of color who's both Black and Asian, and not have any representation on your team? You know, that's kind of tone deaf right now. That's all that it was. And it sparked a huge conversation that then jumped off of there, and anyone can find it. I think Deadline and a couple others wrote about it, about who tells our stories, who has the right to tell our stories, with what kind of cultural nuance, what kind of lens are we seeing these stories through, and how important is it for us to have authorship and ownership and representation. And so when I saw that, I was, cheering from the sidelines. I didn't add my comments, but I felt very profound feelings about it. And what I started to notice is that what it opened up was a lot of opportunity, finally, when people are starting to reflect and have these rather uncomfortable conversations, whether it's about authorship, whether it's about hiring practices, whether it's about not considering, for whatever reason, Black people, Black women, people of color, women, any category of people whose voices have not been amplified, but whose stories are equally as important. And so suddenly I'm getting calls and a lot of propositions and things. And some of them are culturally sensitive, and some of them feel like, well, we need a Black person out front. But what I'm glad for is whatever socioeconomic, socio-political, racial cliff that we're on right now, is that it is creating this certain re-examination of ownership, authorship, and representation. Because the stories we need to tell now, it's like, there's been a big break in our timeline on this earth, really, not just in America, not just in the arts, but how will we move forward? And we are at an inflection point. We are on the eve of a great racial reckoning. But also, we've all been in a pandemic. So how will we move forward? What stories will we tell? Who will be aligned with us? And what is the genesis behind those alliances? And so I'm discussing all of this with my teams and wondering, what is the next step? What is important to tell? And can we maintain that sort of the genuine ferocity that has fueled Mr. Soul? Can we put that behind other projects? One project, so ironic, see if I can reach it without going off camera, I was approached about is ironically the story of soul, but not soul as we know it, but soul as a concept. And so there's a trilogy of books by a gentleman by the name of Stuart Cosgrove about the beginning of soul as a culture. And it's broken down by 1 month per year. So it starts with Detroit 67. Can you see that? And then you have 68 and 60, 68.
Wow.
And then 69. Hans, I was going to talk to you about this. And of course, I'm thinking, yikes, that's a giant project. But then I'm having, and I can share this with you, my own reservations about it, saying, well, this is fantastic. What a great sort of academic source for what could be a really impactful series and really important series. And of course, with all my knowledge of soul, the era, the music, obviously I would be a great choice. But my question then becomes, but whose scholarship is this? This is actually the scholarship of a white Scottish origin gentleman who lives in Canada. So then I'm going, okay. So you can understand my dilemma, because on the one hand, I'd love to jump in and do the story. On the other hand, and I'm sure we could have a whole other discussion about this, how do you approach this now when the scholarship is from an outsider's viewpoint, not just from the country, but from the race, but also know that, well, wow, great, he's done the scholarship. Can I then take this and put my lens of a African-American who has lived experience and who comes from generations of emancipated people on this earth? You know, can I take that and put that in front of this? So these are a lot of questions that I'm trying to answer right now. I'm grateful to have these opportunities and to be having these open discussions. Another discussion I had just the other day was about a popular figure who is somewhat controversial, but it involves a Black man who has, you know, come under scrutiny for a major cultural mishap, which is all I can say right now. So the questions I have about are, well, is it going to be a hit piece? Because if it is, I can't do it. But is it going to be a nuanced approach to Black culture that is illuminating, informational, and accurate, and uplifting, and beautiful? That's my bailiwick right now. But what's exciting is to know that finally, these types of stories, and I'm not saying it's because of Mr. Soul, but it's really because of what's happening in the world, that these types of stories are finally getting the type of exposure that they need. The question of how we got here and what that, you know, what the provenance of the connection to the material is, that's something we'd probably have to work out.
Yeah.
But it is exciting. And I never really thought of myself as an example, because remember that everything I was doing along the way was just trying to figure out a way to make it work.
Yeah.
And sometimes those happy accidents and the right intentionality and pulling the right team together to bolster all those choices is what leads you in the direction. And you just hope that you're going in the right direction and that your creativity and your intentions will lead you down that path.
It's amazing. Well, I'm happy for you that there's a recognition of the skill, sort of the overall gravitas that you bring to the field of documentary, and in the other spaces that you will move into, and that you are seen as a leader and an important voice. I want to take the opportunity to open up the space for questions, although I'm enjoying this conversation between the two of us. And I haven't really got a chance to speak to you in depth. We've both been very busy. But I want to open questions to everybody who's participating. So you can do one of two things. You can either just unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can put it in the chat if you're shy, and I will monitor the chat and I will read it in my deep Barry White voice. This is my I woke up in the morning voice, and I'll gladly answer ask your question. So please, anybody who has a question of any kind, there are no bad questions. Please, take the time to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask, or like I said, put it in the chat and I will chat. Somebody asked a question: upcoming film on the woman in painting behind you.
Good eye, good eye, good eye. This is a great story, and I was hoping somebody would notice that. Yes, it is placed prominently, but it's also an artist that I'm in love with right now. And Hans, I wanted to tell you about her because she is of Haitian descent.
Okay.
The artist of this painting is actually, it's not a painting, I hate to disappoint you, but it's actually a photograph in that sort of photorealism style where actually, no, that's not accurate. When you, what do you call that style? It's a painterly style where you take a photograph and make it look like a painting. There is some sort of technique there. Forgive me for not knowing what
it is. That us Haitians do. That's the few art stuff that I do. That's what I do. I do historical recreations of famous paintings through photographs.
So this is somewhat of an historical recreation. The artist's name, and please drop her in the chat, is Fabiola Jean-Louis. Jeanlouis, and she has a website. I think it's just fabiolajeanlouis.com. I discovered her and I was just blown away. She's super young. She's like early 30s, maybe just turned 34, 32, something like that. And she did this incredible series called Rewriting History, which is right up my alley, of course. What she had found, and something that's important to me in my work, in much of my themes, is this idea of erasure, and this idea of erasure from the culture, and Black women being erased from the narrative. And I was an art history major in college, and that was one thing that frustrated me to no end, was that I could never see Black women or Black people in art. You know, there's like one Rembrandt with like a little black child in it, and you know, you have to really hunt to find these images. And it really frustrated me. And I saw her work and I thought, oh my God, what is this? I met her. She's a new artist, but she has been at the DuSable and she had an exhibit here. And I was just blown away because I didn't understand. I knew the printer who had printed the images, the same printer we worked with for Mr. Soul, who took all of our images and did all the photoshopping and up-resing the images for, 300 to 600 DPI, and to make everything ready, especially the antique sort of images that needed to be fixed, literally. So he told me that there's this artist named Fabiola that I needed to meet. And when somebody says that, I don't ignore. So we made an appointment. And she was having this extraordinary exhibit at the Friedman Home, which is in the Bronx, right here in New York. It's like an artist complex that used to be like a retirement home, and they turned it into a complex that has many different galleries.
You know, that's where I shot my film, right?
Oh, yes, that's right. So that's where I was, you can imagine. So she had a studio upstairs, and on the first floor in those two big rooms, they had changed the room to look like you were in like Versailles, beautiful chandeliers and blue walls and wainscoting and everything. And there in her room are these giant dresses, like the one you see here, only they're made of paper. So she's a multidisciplinary artist where she makes dresses out of paper, and then she populates the dress with a modern person, and then recreates what would be an historic image, but puts a Black person in it, and it creates a whole nother vibe. So this is called Marie Antoinette is Dead. And the woman featured in it is actually a backup singer for Lenny Kravitz.
Wow.
Her name is Zahara, I think. Zahara. And she's a very awesome singer, artist / activist. And so if you look at the work of Fabiola, you'll see there's continued questioning. I have some others I could pull over that I could show you at the end when we're done. But I was just blown away by what she was doing. So when you're in the exhibit, you see the actual dress hanging of paper, and then you see the painting, which is actually a photograph. And so she has done it all. She's made the dress, everything, the curtains, everything you see is made of paper. And then she populates it with an artist or some girl or a woman or a child or a friend that she knows with a backstory. And then she takes the photograph, and then she prints the photograph to make it look like a painting. And what she's doing is, demanding us to re-examine the role of Black women in history, and really reframing this narrative that we have been taken out of. It's really exciting.
Natalie
And
Holly.
yes, she needs her own film.
Yes, she does. Natalie Holly asks, I am honestly just wondering about your career journey prior to working on this film. As an inspiring independent producer, I'm curious and looking for guidance, and congratulations on the success of the film and all your success.
Absolutely. Thank you, Natalie. And it can be a little bit confusing where to start. One thing that I found was really important for me was to find fellowships where you're brought together with other artists and peers, and you can maybe attach yourself to a project that that's being done. And so there are certain, where I'm not sure where you're from, Natalie, if you're from the DMV or if you're West Coast, East Coast, pop it in or let me know. But there are a lot of places that, well, I shouldn't say a lot. There are specific fellowships that help you with the work that you're doing, hone your vision as a producer. You do have to have some type of work that you're showing, or maybe workshopping, or maybe you've done some shorts, or you've worked collectively with other people, or you've been to film school. If there's some way that you can build an idea and then get into a fellowship with like-minded individuals, like if it's in New York, it could be any number of programs from Film Independent in LA, but in New York, it's IFP. They have projects. The IDA has groups. There's a Flaherty Fellowship, which I also did. It's just really important to find your community. And then you start to see what other people are doing and how, if as a producer, you can help bring their vision to fruition, all the while nurturing your own project all the time and always having your different projects, because sometimes you can align with someone else's project that might happen first, which happened in my case. I was making Mr. Soul, but I aligned with another group in Film Independent, and we ended up making an award-winning short that I thought, I'm never gonna have time to do something else, but I was in love with this story, and we put it together, and it became this extraordinary 12-minute short that went to over 50 festivals nationwide and is still being shown because it was ahead of its time. And it was a story about a transgender child not being accepted by her parents, only it was a spirit rather than an actual person. So it had a lot of universal themes, but it was 2013 before people were really talking about transgender love and acceptance, and also rejection on many levels. And so in doing that, I was able to build fellowship with the film community, with other like-minded individuals, other artists, and connect with them, and kept going out on other shoots and working with other people as I was building my own project. And so that's one way to do it. Another way is, if you're just determined to focus on your own work, you have to figure out what your end goal is for the piece that you're doing. And it might just be starting small with a short film or an idea, or maybe it's a podcast. There are many different iterations of the work that you can do too, not necessarily just that one thing, but be open to, maybe it starts as a podcast, maybe it starts as a short, or look at how Issa Rae started with Awkward Black Girl, and that was a completely different idea of the short, you know, internet sensation that she became by having this series on, that then once they realize, oh wait, this could be something huge, and then it becomes Insecure on HBO. But it didn't start as Insecure, so really think about what it is how you want to start your project, but also think about where you see it in the future. And you don't have to share that can be your end game or your long game. It doesn't have to be the end game, but definitely the long game. And you can hold on to that dream, but be open to any other avenues that might happen before. Even if you get distracted on someone else's project, that can help you build credits so that people will want you on the next project. But the key is to know the story that you want to tell and what that long game is, and be open to other things that might happen along the way.
Let's see. I think I have Natalie says that she's She's from New York, but currently in the
okay.
DMV.
Okay.
I think
And
she's
also you can hit me up later if you want to talk further about that. I can share my email or you can find me on social.
Do we have any other questions?
I need my glasses, but forgive me because the ring
Somebody,
light is going to reflect.
somebody's asking, do we have any plan for a drive-in screening of Mr. Soul?
Yes,
Area?
we had some drive-in screenings, which is crazy. One thing that we did when we started the virtual release was we were absolutely adamant that no one was going to get hurt on our watch. So we didn't want anyone to get sick. We know that, people of color are more susceptible to the virus. And so everyone kept saying you should put it in a theater. And we were like, nope, we're not going to do that. But we did partner with a couple of drive-in cinemas, which was really exciting. We were in 3 drive-in cinemas. One was in Detroit and 2 of them were in, I think, Tennessee. And we tried to partner with a drive-in cinema here. There's a new young Black couple that have their own drive-in in Newark, but they were inundated with a block of programming. So we love the drive-in, and I think we might be able to get a couple more because that's a great way to see it. I wish I could have been there. Can you imagine bumping to like Al Green in your drive-in? I mean, that was just everything. It was really exciting to see too. Even as far away as from Instagram, that cars were lined up and watching this film in a drive-in. It was just beyond what I had ever imagined. But we're all trying to adapt, and that's a safe way to have a good time. And we're
Perfect.
all about that.
Rochelle wants to ask you a question. So Rochelle,
yes, Rochelle.
I am from Detroit.
Oh, a real person. Sorry, I got
yes, a real person.
Look at you now.
And I moved here from I'm in California now, but
Yeah.
I remember in Detroit there was a show on PBS, and I remember every community seemed to have that sort of a show. I'm sure Chicago did. New York had cable, when I was a kid, long before it was in the rest of the country. What makes you think that this story is more compelling, or is it just your story? Or do you view it as different than most of those other shows?
Well, that's a really good question. And it certainly did not mean to, to rank this show as being more important than other shows. I think what happened was, in response to the Kerner Commission, especially explaining in 1968 that there was, 2 worlds, one Black and one white, and the media was largely responsible for this. What was being recognized was there was no place for a Black voice for Black voices in broad media. And so that inspired what became what they call Black Power television. So there were shows that were created that were called public affairs shows. And those were shows like, say, Brother out of WGBH in Boston, or Like It Is, Gil Noble in New York, Black Journal, for example. And so all of those did come together at kind of the same time. Black Journal started at the same time as Soul. The difference is that Soul was not just about creating like a news feed in response to what was happening in the media. It was more of a broad spectrum of the full spectrum of Black culture in the arts, politics, dance, music, poetry. And you didn't see that sort of performative value on the other shows. So I wouldn't say that Soul was better or more important. Rather, it captured something in the zeitgeist that was happening in a way that no other show was really doing. And I think that that's important, certainly. I was very interested in all the other shows, especially. And what I really want to say is that when you think about the role and the function of both the studio and the television audience, that is really key to what Soul was doing, because the show aimed to, relate the actual experiences of Black people to the Black audience. And so the fact that each episode was recorded live in front of a live studio audience, that was different from some of the other shows that were happening. And even though it was similar to other talk shows and using sort of this direct address to speak to the audience, which fostered this intimate feel of the show and worked to make the show more of a communal experience. I think the difference was that Ellis Haizlip encouraged audiences at home to participate in that experience. And that was its attempt to reach more of a broad African-American audience. And not a lot of the other shows did that. They were limited by their carriage because of the National Broadcasting Act of 1969, which was enacted in 1970. That's what changed Soul from being a local New York television show to going nationwide when the PBS system, public broadcasting system, which was like a system of stations, was actually created. And so that is what afforded Soul a larger, somewhat, diasporic audience that some of the other shows did not enjoy. For example, the shows that were on out of WNET, which had been WNDT before the merger, they were in the tri-state area. So they weren't reaching across to California or Pittsburgh or, all of the other major carriers. So it's not that I was prioritizing this story for personal reasons, but I felt that it spoke to a larger audience and impacted on a greater level. And certainly launched the careers of many of the African-American icons of the 21st and 20th century. And that was what I was interested in conveying. Yeah. Not to diminish any of the work of the other shows as equally important.
It just sounds, and you're right, because those shows that I grew up with, they were definitely had a political stand, slant. They were not necessarily doing the entertainment, like you mentioned, with artists and having different ones on their show. So that seemed, that was two different things, there was that show too in Detroit, but that was similar to Soul Train.
Yeah,
it didn't combine them. So I think that's great.
Also, I think Soul also was like a cultural space centered on Black artists and Black poets and musicians and athletes, activists. So what was interesting about that was that they were discussing their varying positions on Black liberation, right? And Black identity. So to sort of de-center the common misconception of a monolithic Black community. So other shows weren't really, so Soul positioned itself as an open forum and where opinions were both heard and valued. And so what was different about that was that you have all these episodes that were informative and that were encompassing these discussions on issues that were impacting African Americans in the United States and abroad. So you didn't see that necessarily, remember, and he brought in all these artists from South Africa who were in exile, Keopetse, Ositsile, Miriam Makeba,
Hugh Masekela,
Leta Mbulu, and a lot of these people were coming over because of the same urgency and insistence of Harry Belafonte, who was bringing them over too. But this sort of broad, topics that were more about the Black Panthers and Black power and the assassination of Malcolm X, Black love, homosexuality, and the decimation of the Black community from drugs. So all of these things were not tackled by other shows in a way that because Soul was able to blend art and politics and showing the necessary interconnectedness of the two. And that's what was espoused by the Black Power movement and the Black arts movement, was this interconnection, and that was what led to liberation. So there was something about the Soul show that was liberating in ways, as opposed to just informative, as being a public, a show for the public that way. It was like creating a Black public sphere. That's what I'm trying to say.
It sounds, it was unique. It was unique that way, because it was really, like you said, it was creating it was like hearing the whole community, not just one part.
Exactly. And the fact that he welcomed dissent, which is not something we were trying to do. I mean, we were already divided, by Jim Crow, on the heels of the civil rights movement, horrific Jim Crow, everything that was happening. And yet welcoming these disparate experiences in the Black community that were equally valid. For example, the moment, for those of you who've seen it, with Ellis Haizlip and Louis Farrakhan, that's mind-boggling to me and to many. And many people were like, "Oh, we shouldn't have that in there." And I'm like, well, I can't. Why would I censor the film if we weren't censoring the show 50 years ago? That's not fair. So I am going to put this in here. We're not going to focus on the fact that that Minister Farrakhan is reviled in the United States and reviled for being anti-Semitic and all the awful things. What we're going to focus on is the bravery of Ellis to confront him and to confront the Nation of Islam about the issues that were important to him, which were, not being accepted because of the homophobic,
view,
environment that the nation was known for. And so what you're seeing there is almost like this incredible reckoning. You're seeing game recognizes game, because you're seeing these two gentlemen that are important Black men with important Black leaders that obviously are diametrically opposed. Right. One very open gay Black man and one very, homophobic leader, but they're both giving opportunity to each other to share with the Black community. And that is what's remarkable, because he wasn't trying to tear them down, just like we don't try to tear each other down now. There are different views within our own culture, and that's not something that you would necessarily see. And that's dangerous, that's risky, and it's also revolutionary.
Yeah.
And so that's what we were trying to show, but certainly not to dismiss. And we do shout out a number of the shows at the time to show that Soul was part of an era of Black power television.
Right.
And that was very important. And it was part of a progression. Can't talk anymore after 2 hours. A progression of the Black culture and the Black movement.
Gary,
thank you very much. I appreciate the answer.
Oh, of course.
Very thoughtful.
Gary just says, thank you so much for producing such a timely film. I've never seen Soul before, and I thought I was a history buff. Thank you again for keeping the history alive, and I'm sure your uncle would be proud of the production. We are a little bit over time, so I will end our question and answer period, but I'll just say, thank you for stopping by and sharing Mr. Soul with our community here at George Mason. I want to thank all the institutions at the university that have made this forum possible for us to have this kind of conversation. Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Abby. Thank you, Andrew Jorgensen, and all the support people, Lori Yee, and Samantha Beach, who make this kind of thing possible. And I've been fortunate enough to sit and talk to you and host this currently. And I feel like it's been a long time since we've had just a long conversation that didn't center around our immediate shot or the logistics of a film. So thank you for indulging me and the questions that I posed and answering. And it was so fascinating to really get a chance to pick your brain about your process. I just admire you so much and so proud and happy for you and the success, and so excited what's going to happen for you in the future. So appreciate you stopping by.
Thank you so much. And Hans, you are so lovely and such a wonderful host today, and such an honor to work with you. And if anyone hasn't seen it, please check out the Variety article that I forwarded, in which Hans and I are in conversation about making Mr. Soul and about our aesthetics, which is very exciting to be able to share. We're very excited to be able to talk about the craft and to be two Black creatives talking about the craft. We don't often get that kind of opportunity. But thank you also to Mason University for pursuing this opportunity and for sharing this historic day with us, and for your patience in us putting it all together for you. It's been quite an honor and a privilege, and it's very inspirational.
Well, thank you, everybody.
And thank you to the students too. If you guys want to hit me up, I'm really open. I'm strangely available and accessible. So hit me up at my email address, which you can share, mrsoulmovie@gmail.com, or we're on, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook as well. And let's keep the conversation going, because I'm interested in what you guys are doing and how I can support that.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, everybody that stopped by. And that's it.
Thank you.
Hi, Melissa.
Bye. I'm going to miss you already.
No, no.